The SSDT has a step-by-step printable procedure available on the SSDT wiki. It's under the EIS System Manager Manual's EISIX chapter, and it's called Loading a New Inventory. What we're going to do is cover each of these steps. Step 1 is creating a temporary account. So in my example here, I have a subdirectory that I created called sample_test. And then within that subdirectory, I ran the EIS00 program to create a new empty set of EIS files for this district. So as you can see, any of the files that start with EIS are all empty. The one notation is the EIS pending file. What I did is I copied over the EIS pending file from the district's live information into this sample account. That way I can run some reports if I want to on what is sitting out there pending. Sitting out there on the pending file waiting for tags to be created for those items. I will not copy this EIS pending file back into their live files. I'm going to leave it alone and make sure that I'm copying all the other EIS files except for that one, because I want to use the pending file that is out there in their live directory. Also in here you'll see some USAS related files. I have to have those in here in order to run some of the programs like EIS screen programs like item screen and so on and so forth. So I copied over the account, the invoice amount, the PO amount, the PO hist, and the vendor files from their live data into this test account. So the first thing I'm going to do is go into EIS Mate's DAT screen and enter in a date for the last fiscal year closed. So I'm going into option 4, the DAT screen. And so what I have to do is decide what is the last fiscal year close. What should the last fiscal year closed be for these files? I think the most common question that we get is they have a spreadsheet containing items acquired in the prior year as well as during the current fiscal year. How can they load the data so that they're able to run the gap reports and EIS EMS at the end of the current fiscal year? So if I have a spreadsheet, from the appraisal company, and I want to be able to run these gap schedules at the end of fiscal year 15, but my spreadsheet contains fiscal year 15 data as well, what I would recommend doing is splitting the spreadsheet into two. So the first spreadsheet would contain all items up through and including your fiscal year 14 items, and then the second spreadsheet would contain just your fiscal year 15 items. So that way I can go in and load everything up through 14, close out the year, run EIS gap to set my beginning balances for fiscal year 15, and then take that fiscal year 15 spreadsheet and load that in. And then I'm up to the point then where the district could enter in any other fiscal year 15 items. And then at the end of fiscal year 15, they can run the EIS EMS program or those gap reports like the 103 and the 104. So if that's the case and I decide, to split this into two separate spreadsheets, then what I'm basically doing at this point is prepping myself for fiscal year 14. So if that's the case, my last fiscal year closed, I would be entering in 2013. And then I can enter in any other information that, is recommended at this point, like the district name and their IRN number, and any other thing that's pressing at this point. I probably would put in the capitalization threshold at this point as well, so that when items are loaded and if they meet or exceed that threshold, they'll be considered capitalized on the system. So this district has a board-approved capitalization threshold of $5,000. No life limit, just a dollar limit. So that's all I'm going to put in at this point. One other thing too, and we'll discuss that here in a little bit, is also the gap flag, whether to set that to yes or to no. So that's something that the district needs to decide, because depending on what the gap flag is set, it's going to change the way things are loaded in the system. So if the district wants to have their gap flag set to yes in here at this point, what happens then is when they upload that spreadsheet into the EIS IMP program, acquisition records are going to be created automatically for every item. So this is a huge time saver, and I do recommend this option. That way the district will not have to manually enter acquisition transactions for each item during the cleanup process. The disadvantage, though, is that each acquisition transaction record will be dated July 1st in whatever the current fiscal year is. The reason why it does that is because it can't load the acquisition date from the item record, because the date is not in the current fiscal year. So it doesn't know what to do with that. So if it finds an acquisition date, an item acquisition date from a prior year, it can't load that. It doesn't know what to do. So instead, it just forces that acquisition date for the acquisition record to be July 1st and whatever the current fiscal year is. So in order to set the date on the acquisition record equal to the acquisition date in the item record, there'll be a data truth procedure that needs to be performed a little bit later, and I'll discuss that in another video. So if you decide that you want those acquisition transaction records created automatically, you would set the gap flag to yes, which is what I'm going to do. If you decide instead that you want the gap flag to be set to no, then what happens is when you load that spreadsheet, no acquisition transaction records will be created for any of the items. You'll be able to see the information in item screen, but you won't be able to go into the acquisition transaction program and look up the related acquisition transaction record, because it will not be created. The district would have to manually post an acquisition transaction record for every record, or for every item, or for at least the high dollar, the capitalized items. If those acquisition transaction records aren't added, the capitalized items amount will be reported under the acquisitions prior to system startup line on the EIS 101 gap report. So like I said, in my example, I'm going to keep that gap flag to a yes, and I'm going to go ahead and exit out of that screen. So what I want to do now is load that first spreadsheet. So as you can see, I already have the spreadsheet in my test files. It's called sample_import.csv is the name of the file. So this is the file I'm going to upload in EISIX. So at the menu prompt, I'm going to type in EISIX, and I'm going into the EIS IMP option, option 2. Okay, so let's cover each of these options in this program. The first one is asking is enter the sequential disk file type. My data I received from an appraisal company, and I received it in a spreadsheet format. I pulled that spreadsheet up, and what I did is saved it then in a CSV format. So my import file is the CSV formatted file, and if I'm not quite sure what these file types mean, I can hit the question mark, and it's going to give me some more information about each of those file types. So I want to select C for CSV file. The next thing it's going to ask me is the name of my import file, and I said it was sample_import.csv. And again, like I explained in that first video, these are all of my items up through fiscal year 14. The next prompt is asking, do you want to update records if the tag number already exists. I'm going to leave it as the default of no because this is a brand new inventory. I'm loading it into an empty set of EIS files, so there won't be any existing tag numbers to update. The next prompt is asking if I want to automatically create tag numbers for those without a tag. Now, on my spreadsheet, I could have accidentally left off some tag numbers. So what this does, if I say yes to this, it's going to ensure that those items without a tag number will get assigned a tag. So I'm going to say yes to this. And then what it asks me is, do you want a certain prefix to be used for these? And I'm going to leave it as no tag. That way, when I'm all said and done and it generates a text file at the end of this load, I can go out there and look for these tag numbers that start with no tag and go in then into item screen and change it, modify that tag number to what it should be. I think it's just a lot easier to find these because I've specified the tag as no tag, so that way I can go in, like I said, and enter in the tag number that should be assigned to that item. I'm just going to go through the defaults here. And then the next prompt is asking me, do I want to preserve leading spaces for each tag added? If leading spaces are found at the beginning of a tag number on this spreadsheet, what I recommend is answering no, leaving this default to no, so that any leading spaces are stripped off before the item gets loaded into EIS. If it doesn't get stripped off, then if a user wants to go and look at that tag, they have to enter those leading spaces when trying to find that tag number. So it's just a lot easier to make sure that any hidden leading spaces are removed. So I don't want to preserve those. But do I want to preserve the leading zeros for each tag added? If there are leading zeros in front of a tag number on that spreadsheet and the district wants those leading zeros to be on there, then we recommend leaving the default to yes, so it preserves those leading zeros. Then I'm going to go ahead and continue. It's going to go in and start processing, and it's telling me that the total amount of my acquisitions is 17 million, and that it did generate an EIS add file which will show me the tag numbers that it did add. And not just the tags, also different codes like the item categories, the function codes, the fund codes, the locations. All of that information was on that spreadsheet. All of that gets pulled in and created in the system. And we'll be able to see that when we view the EIS add. Also, if there are any errors generated, we would have received a separate error file as well, and we would have had to have cleaned those up on the system in order to take care of that. In this situation, this example here, we didn't have an error file generated. So let's go ahead and exit out of the EISIX program and view this EIS add file. So here's where I was talking about it didn't just create the tags, it also created the actual codes, like the item category codes, the location codes. So here it found on one of these tags an item category code of LIMP. So it's adding that to CAT screen in the EIS main program. Same thing here. It found a location code. So it's going to take that location code and add that to location screen in the EIS main programs, and so on and so forth. Here's our actual first tag number that it created. So here's the tag. So it says new tag number created with the tag number and the description. And so it doesn't show you everything that got added, but in order to see the rest of the information for that tag, you can go into item screen, look up this tag number, and can view the contents. Also, because we had that EIS gap flag set to yes, it automatically created the acquisition record as well. So that's where it says new acquisition record added. So if we go into acquisition transaction program, we'll be able to look up the related acquisition transaction record. I'm going to write this tag number down, 05866. And then you'll notice that this report is going to be quite large. If I go down to the bottom, it shows me 113 pages. So this very last one was the last acquisition record that got created. So I'm going to write that down, 90475. So it created the item record and item screen, as well as the acquisition record and the acquisition transaction program. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go in and take a look at this first and last tag number and see how they look in those programs. So I'm going to go into EIS screen, and I'm going to go into item screen, and I'm going to look up that first one that was on. And so this is the tag number, and the rest of this information came from the spreadsheet, from those specific columns on the spreadsheet. My item category, number of items, my description, and then also my replacement insurance values. I made sure that I had those in there on the spreadsheet. My location, my asset class, the status defaulted to A for active, the fund and function. And if I page down, here's the rest of the information, my acquisition information. And you'll notice that this item was acquired October 21st of 2009. And the depreciation information. It wasn't a leased item, so I don't have anything on the third screen. So now if I wanted to look at that last tag, I'm going to backspace here and put that in, 90475. If I page up, you'll notice here that this shows that it was capitalized, and the amount of everything on here. These were a lot of elementary textbooks, and all the information regarding that. You notice that these were acquired in November of '93. So I'm going to go ahead and exit out of here. And now I'm going to go into the acquisition transaction program to see the related acquisition record. And it should take me to 90475 right away. And you'll notice that there's not a lot of information in here. This is basically what you're going to see on this acquisition record when you're loading it in from a spreadsheet. It's going to contain the tag number and the date. Now, as I had mentioned before, it is going to, it can't, and I mentioned this in the first video, it can't recognize that date from the item record. Our item record acquisition date was November 1st, 1993. It can't pull that in. So what it does is it just automatically defaults to July 1st of the current fiscal year, and we're in fiscal year 14. So it makes sense that it shows 7/1/2013 in these files. Now later in another video we're going to talk about how we can take this date and change it to that November 1st, 1993 date using DataTrieve. Also, when we're doing that DataTrieve procedure, we'll also be able to assign at least a TI and a fund number in here as well. The rest of the information, though, purchase order information, it's related to this, the vendor, that information doesn't get pulled in. So if the district really wants to track that and include that, they would have to put it in an empty column on the spreadsheet, and it would have to be stored in the item record. So if I go back to the item record, maybe I want the PO number to show up and get stored in the accessories, I would have to put the PO number in the accessories column on the spreadsheet, or maybe on the extra description information. If I want the vendor on here or the check number, that information would have to get stored on an empty field in item screen. It can't get stored on one of those fields on the acquisition transaction record. So once I go through this EIS add report and take a look at some of these tags, if everything looks good, everything got loaded into the proper fields, then at this point, the next thing that I need to do is go back into the EIS Mate program, into DAT screen, and I'm going to temporarily change my gap flag back to no. That way I won't be restricted as much in the system when I'm going in and cleaning up my newly imported data. So by changing this back to no, I have a little more freedom in the system to make any changes I need to. Step 5 wants you to generate an EIS 001 report, which is the local code listing report. So I'm going to go ahead and run that. I need to first access EIS RPT and go into the first option. And I'm going to select everything on this report. So basically, when you uploaded your item information from the appraisal company, that spreadsheet, into the system, not only did it create the items and item screen as well as the records on the acquisition transaction screen program, it also added those locally defined information, such as the location categories, the item categories, your fund, function, asset classes, all of that information that's on the spreadsheet. It added that in to the EIS maintenance programs as well. So if I go ahead and view this report, I page down a little bit. The first couple pages are just settings that are in the inventory programs. These are just default settings, so I'm going to page down through those until I get to the location codes. So you can see anytime it found a new location category and number on that spreadsheet, it added it to the location codes. So these location codes are found under EIS Mate in the location screen program. But you'll notice that it just contains the location category and the location number. There is no description listed on here. So in order for you to add the description information, you would need to go into that particular program. And here are where they're at. And go in here and modify each of these and add the description. Now another option, instead of adding each of these manually, is to go in and create a spreadsheet of this information and upload it through the EIS import program, just like you did with your actual items. So if your appraisal company provided the descriptions for each of these, or if you've got a listing of the descriptions, you can create a spreadsheet, and the format of how that should be, the format of the spreadsheet can be found underneath the EIS Import-Export Tape Specifications document on the SSDT wiki. It provides the format for either a CSV or fixed file. So for example, if I wanted to go in and mass update these existing location category and numbers, input the description in there, what I can do is create a spreadsheet looking off of that Import-Export Tape Specs document and put in my record ID, my location category, my location number, and the actual definition or description of that location. So you'll notice my record ID has to be an L, which stands for location. here are my existing location category and numbers that are already in location screen. So basically what I'm doing is just adding the description of that. I can take this, save it as a CSV file, and then upload it through the EISIX EIS import program. And what it's going to do is mass update those existing location categories with their descriptions. So that is another way of quickly updating those. Like I said, your other option is just to go into each of these, modify, and add the description. So here's my location screen information. If I exit out of here, I go into my classes. Here are my classes with empty descriptions, and so on and so forth. So you can create a spreadsheet for each of these different options in EIS Mate to mass update this information. So you can review that 001 report because it's going to provide not just your location categories. So for this one there are quite a few of them, but it's also going to also show you your item categories that you inputted that were pulled from that spreadsheet, and your fund and your function and your asset classes. So after you're done reviewing this report, step 6 will have you run an EIS 304 report. So in here, you can run this report to carefully review any missing fund, function, or asset classes. Those are required fields in item screen. You need to have an asset class, you need to have a fund, you need to have a function. For some reason, some of your items on that spreadsheet had missing fund, function, or asset classes. Here's where you can run this report to find those missing ones and then go into item screen and update those tags. So I'm going to go ahead and run through the brief asset report, the 304, and I'm selecting to include all tags. Right now, because this is a new inventory, I only have active items, so it really doesn't matter what I put in there. Do I want to see just capitalized or everything? I want to see them all, so I'm going to make sure that it's set to B, which is my default. Are there specific things I want to look at? No. I want to see all asset classes, all funds, all functions. I'm going to go ahead and view this. And so basically what I'm looking at this point is my fund, my function, and my asset class columns. And I'm just kind of thumbing through these, just making sure there aren't any items with missing values. So it looks to me that all of these are filled in. But if I do come across a tag number that has a missing fund, function, or asset class, I can go into item screen, modify that item, and update that field. Because I have my gap flag turned off at this time, I'm able to go in and make those changes to those fields. Once my gap flag is turned back on, those fields are restricted in item screen. Step 7 of the step-by-step procedure is asking about your appraisal company, including depreciation information. So was the depreciation information included on that spreadsheet that I got from the appraisal company? One way to check that out is to run the 303 report. And this is the master listing report. So I don't want to include the entire master listing report. That would be a huge report. Instead, I just want to choose the depreciation information from that report. So I'm going to go ahead and select the 303. I want all items, and I don't want specific items or specific asset classes or fund and functions. I want everything, so I'm just going to hit enter through here. Now, reporting portion options. What part do you want on your report? I want just the depreciation information, so I'm going to select option 5. All items, both capitalized and non-capitalized. And then how I want them sorted, I'm just going to choose the default. And when I view this, you'll notice that it's going to just show me the depreciation information. So in this example here are anything that's marked with the method of S, means it's straight line. And if I have a straight line method selected, I should also check to make sure that I have a date and a possible life-to-date figure and an actual life value in here. Those are the big ones that I want to check. Now you can run the EIS DEPR program that can recalculate your life-to-date figures if you feel that those are incorrect. There is a projection option that you can run first, and if you feel that the life-to-date figures that were supplied by the appraisal company are incorrect, you can run the EIS DEPR in actual mode, and it'll go out there and recalculate your life-to-date information. If the depreciation information was not included on the spreadsheet, the method was not included, the date, the life value, none of that was included on there, you can run EIS changes mass change to full depreciation to calculate depreciation information for you. The last step in this video, step 8, is just to check to make sure that the spreadsheet that you received included all of your district's fixed assets. So it could be possible that they left out your land values or your vehicles or things like that. So what you can do, again, is run a 304 report. Again, selecting all items, and I would sort it at the very end by asset class. And then when you view that, when you're paging down here, you can see all the totals for that particular asset class, and it says total for asset class 0100. I know that's my land and land improvements. So going up here, I can kind of look over these tags and make sure, that it contains everything. Same thing with my buildings, making sure that they included my buildings. It looks like it just by looking here. And then here's my totals for that asset class, and so on and so forth. Obviously your fixtures, furniture, and equipment is going to be your biggest portion. And then if I go down to the bottom, I also have ones for the 0600, the textbooks, and the 0400 for vehicles. So I'm pretty confident that the spreadsheet contained all of my different asset classes and all the items underneath those. Step 9 involves using DataTree to set the item's acquisition date in the acquisition transaction record equal to the item's acquisition date in item screen. Just to recap, when you imported that spreadsheet using EIS import, and if you had your gap flag set to yes, what it did was it created an item record in item screen, and it also created an acquisition transaction record that you can look up in the acquisition transaction program. Any items that have an item acquisition date that isn't equal or isn't within the current fiscal year, what happens is that related acquisition transaction record defaults to a date of July 1st of the current fiscal year. So what this procedure we're going to cover here in DataTree will do is it will actually change that default July 1st date to the true acquisition date that's found on the item record. Okay, so the first thing you need to do is access DataTree and set your dictionary to the EIS dictionary. After that, we have to ready both the acquisition and the items domain. So I'm going to ready the acquisitions domain first. Now basically what these two mean is that the first one, I'm readying the acquisitions. Instead of having to type out acquisitions, the whole time I'm in DataTree here, I've abbreviated it as ACQ. And I've also made sure that that it has write access, meaning that I can erase data if I need to, or override data. Also with the items, I also shorten that to IT. So next, the acquisition domain will need to be crossed with the items domain to determine if there are any items that truly have an acquisition date in the current fiscal year. So what I'm doing is finding information in the item record, crossing the acquisition record, crossing the item record over the inventory tag number, because I know those would be the same in each of those files. So what it did is it found 215 records where the acquisition date on the acquisition record is 7/1/2013, and the acquisition date on the item record is 7/1/2013. So I know that that's the same date, that those are equal. So I'm basically just kind of setting those aside so I don't change the date on the acquisition record for those. So what I'm going to do in order to do that, to kind of set those aside, I'm going to set the grant ID field on that acquisition record to new. The next command will find the rest of the items where the item record's acquisition date does not match the date on the acquisition record. So in here it found a total of 1,205 records. So the acquisition date is a key field. So in order to modify it on the acquisition record, I have to use a store command, which ends up creating two sets of acquisition records for each item. The original set will be my existing 7/1/2013 acquisition date, but the new set will reflect the item's true acquisition date that's from the item record. So in order to distinguish between the two sets, the grant ID will be set to new on the new set. So here's my store command. Next, the original set with the 7/1/2013 dates will be deleted. The transaction indicator and the fund dimensions of the EISIX account on that acquisition transaction records can be set at this time as well. TI can be set to 05 while the source fund can be set equal to the current fund on the item record. This might not be accurate for all items, but it prevents the items from being reported under the acquisition prior to system startup amount on the 101 report. Finally, the new will be erased from the grant ID for that new set. So I'm going to go ahead and finish and exit out of DataTree. And now I'm going to go in and look up one of these tags to make sure. I'm going to look it up in item screen first and look at the acquisition date on there. And then I'm going to go into the related acquisition transaction record and make sure that the date now matches. So if I page down here, you notice that the date on here is 7/1/1940. So before, the date on the acquisition record would have reflect 7/1/2013 because of the way I loaded the data, that spreadsheet in. So now, because I did this data tree procedure, the related acquisition transaction record should also show an acquisition date of 7/1/1940. So I'm going to go into acquisition transaction, and the tag automatically pulls up, and you notice that the date now shows 7/1/1940. And I also noticed that my account code, the fund, now reflects the fund number here. That's reflected in here as well. Step 10 of the procedure involves copying the EIS data over to the live files. So looking at my screen right now, you'll see the EIS files involved. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just copy over each one individually so you can see the ones that I'm copying over to my live data. So again, I'm in my temporary account where I've uploaded my spreadsheet, done cleanup on the files. Everything's ready to go, so now that I can copy it over. So the first one I'm going to copy is my EIS ACQ.IDX file. And I have a sample live directory here, which I'm going to use as the district's live files here. So I'm copying the EIS ACQ.IDX file over. And what this file contains is the acquisition information in EIS. The next one is the audit file. And because this is a brand new inventory, and we did minimal cleanup, there probably isn't anything in this audit file, but again, we still need to copy it over to purge out the old inventory in their live account. And the EIS dat.rel, that's basically the configuration information for inventory. Next one is the EIS DSP.IDX file. This is the disposition information, and this file is probably blank as well because this is a brand new inventory and we haven't disposed of anything yet. The next one is the item information. This is basically the information that's in item screen. The EIS LOC is your local code information. So all of those different programs underneath EIS Mate, all that data is stored in this file. scroll back up here. I think there's one more here. The EIS pen.idx file, that is one file I will not copy over. I want to be using the pending file that's sitting out there in their live directory. So I don't want to take this one and copy it back over to the live account. So I'm going to skip that one. The last one I'm going to copy over is the EIS tran file. So basically reviewing this, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 files, EIS files that are copied over into the live account. So now I'm going to go into that live account. And I'm going to take a look and see the acquisition file. The second version is my most recent version that I just copied over from my temporary account. It's going to purge out the old version here. The odd file, obviously, like I said, this is probably an empty file to begin with, but it's going to purge out the old auditor file. Here is my relative file, my dispositions, my item information, my local code information. The pending file, obviously, I just have the version, which is the original version from the live data, and then the transfer transaction data. So everything appears to have copied over completely. So on step 11, the next thing I want to do is just verify the EIS pending threshold amounts and the configuration screen are correct, so that the correct invoiced items are being pulled into the pending file. So this is just something that the district wants to double check. They probably already have it set up the way they've been, using it in their old inventory, but if they want to make changes, this is probably the time to do it. And this is in EIS Data in the configuration screen. And what I'm looking at is the equipment inventory information over off to the side here. It says that it's an A, set to an A, which means it's going to pull any 600 object code that is $250 or more from a PO, and it's going to pull it into the pending file. So if the district feels that they need to change the setting or the actual amount to something else, they can do so at this time. Or, they can leave it as is. One other thing that they probably want to do is check out their current pending file. And basically what they're trying to determine if there are any items currently on the pending file that were already loaded in when the spreadsheet was uploaded. So what they can do is they're going to run the 501 report, which is the pending report. And they can sort it by invoice date first, and then PO number and PO item. And I'm not going to page break or add any extra lines. And so when they do this, they can look at this because it's already sorted by invoice date, and check to see if there are any items that were still in the pending file prior to the physical inventory. And if so, they just need to determine, were those items actually loaded in when the spreadsheet was loaded, or are they really actual items that still need to be included in EIS? So they can look down here and look at the invoice date and just verify. If they see something invoice date prior to the physical inventory date, they want to double check those. And if it really is a duplicate, what they can do is they can go into EIS screen and go into the pending program, find that item, and delete it off of the pending file. An alternative to deleting items from the pending file is to create a new pending file starting from when that physical inventory was taken. So what they could do is they could take the current pending file, the EIS pen.idx file, and copy it to a different extension, like EIS pen.sav, for example. Then run the EIS00 program to create a new empty pending file. Next, run the EISPND program to repopulate the pending file from when the physical inventory was taken. After it creates a new pending file, they can run the 501 report again to verify that it only contains items after that physical inventory was taken. So if the new pending file looks correct, they can remove that saved pending file, the EISPend.sav file. Steps 12 and 13 include running some year-end reports and just verifying that the amounts, the capitalized asset amounts, match what was actually reported to ODE for, in our example, fiscal year 14. So because the gap flag, remember we turn the gap flag back off. I'm going to go into DAT screen so you can see that. So because the gap flag is turned back off, they won't be able to run reports like the 103 and the 104. So if the district wants to confirm that the capital asset amounts they reported to ODE for fiscal year 14 match what is currently on file, they could run maybe the 101 or the 102 report to get those amounts. They can also generate a 304 report selecting capitalized assets, but they need to note that they only need governmental type asset amounts. Those are the governmental types are the ones that get reported to ODE. Fiduciary and proprietary amounts do not. Also, for the depreciated figures, they can run a 305 in place of the 104. So if the assets do match and what they actually submitted to ODE, they're ready to close out fiscal year 14. Next, the district is going to run EIS close to close out their data for 14. What happens then is after the district runs EIS close, and they're using the actual option to do that, it's going to create an eisclose.txt file. Let's take a look at that. And it's going to show their ending balances for the year. And it's going to display it one by fund, and then by function, and then by asset class. So if they want to run it in projection mode first, that's fine. And then once they confirm that everything looks good, they can run EIS close again in actual mode. Once that is all said and done, then they can go into EIS Mate, and they'll notice in the DAT screen that their fiscal year close should now be updated to 2014 to show that they did close out for the year. At this point then, the ITC will have to run EIS gap to change the gap flag to yes. You do not want to go into DAT screen and manually change the gap flag in here. That will do nothing to set beginning balances. What EIS gap does is turns on the gap flag and sets the beginning balances for fiscal year 15. That way, when the district is ready to close out 15 at the end of the fiscal year, they'll be able to run their gap reports like the 103 and the 104 report, as well as EIS EMS. If you would just go in and switch this flag, it does nothing to set those beginning balances, and you won't be able to get those beginning balances then when you're running your 103 and 104 reports. So it's very important to actually go in and run the actual program. And that's EIS gap. And it states that this must be run at the beginning of the fiscal year, which is correct. We are at the beginning of fiscal year 15, so I'm going to go ahead and continue. And it does generate a text file, the eisgap.txt. And if I look at that, it's going to give me my beginning balances for fiscal year 15. Here's my fund. Note the description is blank. That's because during the cleanup process, I did not enter those descriptions for those funds or functions or even asset classes in the maintenance programs yet. So that's something obviously that the district can still do. I just didn't do it here in my test account. So, but you'll notice though, more importantly, on the right hand side are the beginning balances. So it shows you what they look like by fund, by function, and by asset class. And another thing I can do then is actually go back into the DAT screen, and my gap flag should automatically be set to yes now, because when I run EIS gap, that'll turn that flag to yes. Now when I go in, at the end of the year, I can run those 103 reports and those 104 reports because those beginning balances are there. So at this time, I am in fiscal year 15. I have my beginning balances set. So what the district can do is take that second spreadsheet that contains just fiscal year 15 items and load that in using the EISIX program, the import, just like they did that first spreadsheet. After they load that in, then everything from their new inventory is complete. So one thing with those new items that they just loaded in, those fiscal year 15 items, since all the items have an acquisition date in fiscal year 15, and obviously the district's EIS files are in 15, the acquisition date on the acquisition records will match the acquisition date on the item records. There's no need to use DataTree to set those dates to match to each other. So like I said, they have successfully loaded their new inventory in. Now the district is at the point where they can continue processing EIS for fiscal year 15, and then when they get at the end of the fiscal year, they will be able to run their gap reports as well as the EIS EMS program.